military soldier, unearths a canine German Shepherd from the rubble. But what he found next to him shocked everyone: a massive explosion, a desperate rescue mission. Beneath the ruins, a canine German Shepherd barely clinging to life. But when the soldier finally uncovered what was lying next to him, everyone was left in shock. This is a story of bravery, loyalty, and an unimaginable discovery that changed everything. Stay with us until the end to witness a moment that will stay in your heart forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more powerful and inspiring stories like this to you. Now, let's dive into this emotional journey. The ground was still trembling from the aftershock, dust and smoke swirling in the air, making it hard to breathe. Sergeant Daniel Carter wiped the sweat and dirt from his forehead as he scanned the collapsed remains of what had once been a military outpost. His ears were still ringing from the explosion that had taken down most of the building, but he couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Not when there were still lives buried beneath the rubble. "Over here! I heard something," one of the soldiers called out, his voice strained from exhaustion. Daniel rushed over, his heart pounding. He knew exactly who they were searching for. Rex, the K9 German Shepherd, had been assigned to his unit for 2 years, a loyal companion and fearless soldier. He had saved lives on countless occasions, sniffing out explosives and alerting the team to threats before they even saw them coming. Rex had been more than just a dog. He had been family. Daniel dropped to his knees, digging frantically through the broken concrete and twisted metal. He ignored the pain as jagged debris cut into his hands. The only thing that mattered was getting Rex out. Then he heard it, a faint, muffled whimper. "He's alive!" Daniel shouted, adrenaline surging through his veins. With renewed determination, he tore away the last few slabs of rubble, revealing the battered and dust-covered form of Rex. The dog was barely breathing, his chest rising and falling in shallow movements. But he was alive. Daniel felt relief flood through him, but it was short-lived, because as he reached to pull Rex out, his hand froze. There, next to the wounded K9, was something, or someone, else. A pale hand protruded from the debris, motionless and covered in dust. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't one of his men. It wasn't anyone he recognized. And as he cleared more of the rubble away, his blood ran cold, because what he found next was something that no one could have expected. Sergeant Daniel Carter's breath came in sharp gasps as he stared at the motionless hand protruding from the debris. Dust and blood coated the pale skin, and for a second, he feared the worst. He had been so focused on rescuing Rex, his wounded K9's German Shepherd, that he hadn't expected to find anyone else buried beneath the rubble. "Help me clear this," he shouted, urgency spiking in his voice. 2 soldiers rushed over, their boots crunching against unearthed, shattered concrete as they began pulling away the wreckage. Daniel worked furiously, ignoring the deep gashes on his hands. Every second counted. As they removed the last pieces of broken stone, the full picture came into view. A child, a young boy, no older than 10, lay barely breathing beneath the debris, his face streaked with soot and dried blood. His dark eyes fluttered open for a brief second before rolling back. His frail body trembled, and Daniel could tell he was barely clinging to consciousness. "He's alive," one of the soldiers confirmed, pressing 2 fingers to the boy's neck. His pulse was faint, but steady. Daniel's mind raced. Who was this child? The outpost had been strictly military. No civilians were supposed to be anywhere near the compound. How had he ended up trapped here? "We need a medic, now," Daniel barked. A nearby combat medic, Specialist Jared Owens, ran toward them, his bender already in hand. He knelt beside the boy, quickly assessing his injuries. "Possible internal bleeding," Owens muttered, shining a small flashlight into the boy's barely responsive eyes. Multiple fractures, dehydration. We need to get him out of here immediately. Daniel's heart pounded as he turned his attention back to Rex. The dog lay panting heavily, his body covered in scrapes and bruises. His hind leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, likely broken. But despite the pain, Rex's eyes never left Daniel, as if he had been guarding the boy this whole time. And then it hit him. Rex wasn't alone under the rubble by accident. He had stayed behind with the child. Daniel swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. The explosion must have taken out the building in an instant, trapping them both inside. Yet, Rex hadn't left his side even when he had the chance. He saved him, Daniel muttered under his breath. What? Owens asked, looking up. Rex. He stayed with him, Daniel clarified, a lump forming in his throat. He could have tried to escape, but he didn't. He stayed to protect him. The realization sent a chill through Daniel's spine. He had known Rex was loyal. He had seen the K9 save lives before. But this was something deeper. This wasn't just training. This was instinct, love, devotion. We need to move, Owens shouted as the sounds of shifting rubble filled the air. The weakened structure was still unstable, and another collapse could bury them all. Daniel didn't hesitate. He reached down, gently lifting Rex into his arms. The dog let out a low whimper, but didn't resist. His body was weak, but his eyes still burned with determination. One of the soldiers carefully picked up the boy, cradling him against his chest. He was barely responsive, his breathing shallow. Time was running out. The medical tent was filled with the scent of antiseptic and the muffled sounds of urgent voices. Sergeant Daniel Carter stood outside, his fists clenched as he watched the chaos unfold. Medics rushed around, attending to the wounded, but his eyes remained locked on two figures, Rex and the boy. Rex lay on a metal examination table, an oxygen mask strapped around his snout. His fur was matted with blood and dirt, his chest rising and falling in slow, pained breaths. A military veterinarian, Captain Sarah Mitchell, was working furiously to stabilize him. A few feet away, the young boy was surrounded by combat medics. His small frame looked even more fragile under the bright surgical lights. His breathing was shallow, his pulse weak. Daniel had never felt so powerless. He had spent years on the battlefield, facing enemies, dodging bullets, leading men into danger, but this? Waiting, watching, hoping. It was unbearable. A voice pulled him from his thoughts. Sergeant Carter. He turned to see Captain Mitchell, her face grim. He's in bad shape, she admitted, glancing at Rex. His leg is shattered. We're trying to control the bleeding, but if the infection spreads, we might have no choice but to amputate. Daniel felt his chest tighten. No, there has to be another way. Mitchell takid. I'll do everything I can, but I won't let him suffer. Daniel swallowed hard, nodding. He knew she was right, but the thought of Rex, his partner, his friend, losing a limb was unbearable. Just then, another medic, Specialist Owens, rushed toward him. The kid's stable, but barely. We're prepping him for evacuation. Daniel exhaled in relief, but Owens' face remained tense. There's something you need to know, Owens said, lowering his voice. The boat. He wasn't supposed to be there. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Owens glanced around before continuing. This outpost was strictly military. No civilians, no children. But we checked his clothes. He was wearing local military fatigues. And his hands. Owens hesitated. They're rough, calloused, like a soldier's. A cold shiver ran down Daniel's spine. You think he was one of them? Owens didn't answer immediately. We don't know yet. But if he was being used, if they were training kids. Daniel's jaw clenched. He had seen many horrors during his service, but the thought of child soldiers was something that never got easier. He turned back toward the boy. His face was peaceful now, free from the pain and fear he had seen earlier. Could he really have been an enemy? And if so, why did Rex stay with him? Daniel felt a sudden chill of realization. Rex was a trained canine. He would never protect an enemy. If Rex had stayed with this boy, it meant one thing. He saw him as innocent. "Sergeant," Owens said cautiously, "Command's going to want answers." Daniel nodded, his eyes still locked on the boy. "Then we'd better get them." At that moment, Rex let out a low whimper. Daniel turned just in time to see his partner's eyes flicker open. He stepped closer, resting a hand on the dog's head. "You're a damn hero, buddy. Just hold on." Rex's tail gave the faintest twitch before his eyes slid shut again. Daniel straightened. There were still too many unanswered questions. Who the boy was, how he got here, why Rex had protected him. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about finding the truth. The dim glow of the medical tent cast long shadows across the floor as Sergeant Daniel Carter sat beside Rex, his loyal canine partner. The dog's breathing was steady but weak, his injured leg bandaged tightly. Captain Sarah Mitchell had managed to stabilize him, but the risk of infection still lingered. If Rex didn't respond to treatment soon, amputation would be inevitable. Across the tent, the young boy lay unconscious, hooked up to IV fluids. The medical team had done their best, but his survival was still uncertain. His frail frame was covered in bruises, and the scars on his arms hinted at a past far more brutal than any child should endure. Daniel's mind raced. Who was this boy? Why had he been buried under the outpost? And why had Rex, a highly trained military canine, refused to leave his side? A rustling noise broke his thoughts. The boy stirred. Daniel stood quickly, moving closer. The boy's eyelids fluttered before finally opening, his dark eyes filled with confusion and fear. "Hey, kid," Daniel said gently, keeping his voice calm. "You're safe now." The boy's gaze darted around the room, his body tense as if expecting an attack. His hands clenched the blanket tightly. Daniel took a deep breath. He had seen this look before, the look of someone who had survived things they could never explain. "I need to know your name," Daniel continued. "Can you tell me?" The boy's lips parted, but no sound came out. He swallowed hard, his small chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. "He's traumatized," Captain Mitchell murmured, stepping beside Daniel. "He might not be able to talk yet." Daniel nodded, but something about the boy's reaction didn't sit right. It wasn't just fear, it was something more. Then, slowly, the boy raised his hand and pointed. Not at Daniel, not at the medics, but at Rex. The dog, still weak, let out a faint whimper, his ears twitching as if he recognized the boy's presence. Daniel exchanged a glance with Mitchell. He knew Rex. The boy's fingers trembled as he moved his hand, pressing against his own chest. Mitchell's breath caught. "He's saying Rex protected him?" Daniel crouched beside the bed, his expression firm but gentle. "Did Rex save you?" The boy nodded once. Then, hesitating, he lifted his fingers to his lips and made a small zipping motion, as if sealing them shut. Daniel's stomach tightened. "He's hiding something," he muttered under his breath. Mitchell crossed her arms. "Or someone made sure he wouldn't speak." Daniel's fists clenched. Was the boy a hostage, an escaped captive, or something worse? Before he could ask anything else, a soldier rushed into the tent. "Sergeant Carter, command wants you now. They have intel on the boy." Daniel hesitated, glancing back at him. "Stay here," he told Mitchell. "Watch him, and keep Rex safe." Mitchell nodded. "Go." Daniel took one last look at the boy, at the silent plea in his eyes. "Who are you?" he wanted to ask. But for now, all he could do was find out what command knew. As he stepped into the cold night air, a dark feeling settled in his gut. This was no ordinary rescue, and whatever truth was waiting for him, it wouldn't be easy to face. Sergeant Daniel Carter marched toward the command tent, his heart pounding with anticipation. Something wasn't right. The boy's silence, Rex's refusal to leave his side, and now the urgency from command, it all pointed to a truth bigger than just a simple rescue. He entered the tent where Colonel James Holloway stood over a table, studying classified documents. His weathered face was unreadable as he motioned for Daniel to step closer. "You found a boy under that rubble," Holloway stated, his voice firm. Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir. He's barely 10, malnourished, and covered in scars. He hasn't spoken, but he recognized Rex." Holloway exhaled sharply. "That's because he wasn't supposed to survive." Daniel's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" The colonel slid a confidential file across the table. "We've been tracking a covert enemy operation for months. We suspected they were using child soldiers, training them, forcing them into combat. But we didn't have proof. Until now." Daniel's jaw tightened as he flipped through the documents. Images of children in makeshift military gear, some holding weapons too large for their small hands. His stomach churned. Holloway continued. "That outpost you were stationed at? It wasn't just a military base. It was a known enemy target. The explosion that brought it down? It wasn't from an airstrike." Daniel's pulse quickened. "You're saying it was intentional?" Holloway nodded. "We intercepted radio chatter. The enemy had orders to eliminate all evidence of their operations, including the children. They rigged the site to collapse, ensuring no survivors." Daniel's mind reeled. The boy wasn't just an innocent civilian caught in the wrong place. He was meant to die. His fists clenched. And yet Rex stayed with him. "That's what we don't understand," Holloway admitted. "Military canines are trained to detect threats. If that boy had been dangerous, Rex would have acted differently. Instead, he protected him." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Because he wasn't a threat. He was just a kid trying to survive." The colonel studied him for a long moment. "We need to question him. We need to know if there are more." Daniel nodded. "I'll talk to him. But forcing him won't work. He's scared. He trusts Rex. That's our way in." Holloway's gaze darkened. "Then make it happen. Time is running out." Back at the medical tent, Daniel entered quietly, his eyes scanning the room. The boy was awake but tense, his small hands still gripping the blanket. His dark eyes flickered to Daniel, but there was no trust there yet. Rex, though weak, stirred at Daniel's presence. His ears twitched, his body shifting slightly toward the boy. Even in pain, his protective instincts were still strong. Daniel crouched beside the bed, keeping his voice calm. "Hey, buddy. You did good out there." The boy's eyes darted between him and Rex. He still didn't speak. Daniel reached into his pocket, pulling out a military dog tag, one that had belonged to a fallen soldier. He placed it on the boy's lap. "I know you've seen things no kid should ever have to see," Daniel said softly. "I know you're scared, but you survived. Rex made sure of that." The boy's fingers traced the tag, his expression unreadable. Daniel leaned in slightly. "Tell me something, kid. Why did Rex stay with you?" The boy hesitated. Then, slowly, he pressed a shaking finger to his lips, sealing them shut just like before. Daniel's heart sank. He was protecting someone, and that meant there were more out there. Sergeant Daniel Carter stared at the young boy, his chest tightening. The way the kid pressed his finger to his lips, a silent vow to keep a secret, told Daniel everything he needed to know. There were more children out there. Rex let out a faint whimper, his body still weak, but his eyes were locked on the boy, as if urging him to speak. Daniel kept his voice low. "Listen, kid. I don't know who hurt you, but you're safe now. No one here will harm you. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But if there are others, other kids like you, we need to help them. The boy's hands trembled as he clutched the blanket tighter. He wanted to say something. Daniel could feel it, but fear held him captive. Captain Sarah Mitchell stepped in, her expression gentle. He's in shock, Daniel. He may not be able to speak yet. Daniel nodded, but wasn't ready to give up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Rex's badge, the one the K9 wore on his harness. He placed it on the bed beside the boy. Rex didn't leave you behind, Daniel said softly. That means you're important. The boy's lips parted slightly as his small fingers hesitated over the badge. He glanced at Rex, then back at Daniel. Then, in the faintest whisper, he spoke. Liam. Daniel's heart nearly stopped. It wasn't much, but it was a name. Is that your name? He asked carefully. The boy hesitated before nodding slowly. Mitchell exhaled in relief. That's a good start. But Daniel wasn't done. He leaned in slightly. Liam. Are there others? Liam's breath hitched. His gaze darted toward the tent's entrance, his entire body going rigid. Daniel's instincts flared. Something was wrong. Before he could press further, a soldier burst through the tent, his face pale. Sergeant Carter! We've got a situation. Unidentified hostiles spotted near the perimeter. Daniel's blood ran cold. How close? Less than a mile out. They're moving fast. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. They were coming. He turned back to Liam, who was now visibly shaking. His small hands gripped Rex's badge like a lifeline. Daniel knelt down, looking him in the eyes. Liam, if there are others, we need to find them, but we can't do that if we don't know where to look. The boy's breathing was erratic, but finally he pointed, not toward the base, but toward the distant mountains beyond the rubble. Daniel followed his gaze, realization hitting him like a bullet. That's where they were hiding. He turned to his team. We move now. Grab your gear. Mitchell hesitated. What about Rex? He's not strong enough. He's coming. Daniel interrupted. His jaw clenched. Rex saved that kid for a reason. If we're walking into the unknown, I want him with me. Mitchell exhaled but nodded. Then, let's not waste time. Daniel scooped Rex up carefully, the dog letting out a weak but determined huff. He wasn't done fighting yet. As they stepped out of the medical tent, the distant shadows of the enemy forces grew closer. Time was running out, and the real battle was just beginning. Sergeant Daniel Carter moved swiftly through the darkness, his rifle gripped tightly. Rex, still weak but determined, trotted beside him, his ears perked despite the pain in his injured leg. They didn't have time to waste. The enemy was closing in, and the missing children were out there, somewhere. The air was thick with tension. The faint sound of footsteps rustled through the trees ahead. Daniel signaled to his team, lowering himself behind a large rock. They weren't alone. Eyes up, he whispered. They're close. Rex let out a low growl, his fur bristling. Even injured, he was still a soldier, still protecting. A soft snapping of twigs sent Daniel's heart pounding. He lifted his rifle just as a shadow emerged from behind the brush. A small figure stepped forward. Liam! Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Kid? What the hell? Before he could finish, Liam pointed frantically behind him. His face was pale with fear. He wasn't running toward them. He was running away from something. Then, a chilling sound filled the night. A gunshot. Daniel reacted instantly, pushing Liam down just as bullets tore through the air. His team fired back, the sharp cracks of rifles echoing through the canyon. Move! Get him to cover! Daniel shouted. A soldier grabbed Liam and pulled him behind a boulder as the gunfire raged. Daniel's heart pounded as he scanned the trees. Where were the other children? Then Rex barked. A sharp, urgent sound. Daniel turned and saw him limping forward, sniffing the air, following a scent. Daniel trusted him. Always had. Rex has got something. Move. Following Rex's lead, Daniel ran, pushing deeper into the woods. The sound of gunfire faded as they distanced themselves from the main battle. Then he saw it. A small wooden shack hidden among the trees. Daniel's stomach clenched. Were the kids inside? He approached cautiously, his rifle raised. Rex stood at the door, whining. Daniel didn't wait. He kicked the door open, his weapon ready. And there, huddled in the corner, were 5 terrified children. Their faces were streaked with dirt, their eyes wide with fear. They didn't pull, didn't speak, until one of them recognized Liam standing behind Daniel. Liam, a little girl sobbed. Liam ran to her, hugging her tightly. Relief crashed over Daniel, but it was short-lived. The battle outside wasn't over, and the enemy wouldn't stop until they took back what they had lost. We have to move now. He turned to Rex, giving him a quick scratch behind the ears. You did good, boy. Rex, despite his wounds, wagged his tail. He had saved them again. The team moved fast, carrying the children back toward the base, but danger still lurked in the trees. The mission wasn't over. Daniel knew this fight had only just begun. But now, he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for them. And Rex, his loyal K9, his partner, his friend, was fighting beside him, every step of the way. Sergeant Daniel Carter could hear the enemy closing in. The children were exhausted. Liam clutched his sister tightly, and Rex, though weak, was still standing, still ready to fight. Daniel knew they wouldn't make it back to base without a fight. Set up a defensive perimeter, he ordered his team. They had to hold their ground. The soldiers positioned themselves behind rocks and trees, ready for the incoming attack. Daniel crouched beside Rex, stroking the dog's head. You good, buddy? Rex let out a weak but determined growl. Daniel smirked. He wasn't going anywhere. Then, the first enemy shot rang out. A rain of bullets tore through the trees. Daniel fired back, his pulse steady. His team fought fiercely, but the enemy was relentless. Then, from the corner of his eye, Daniel saw something shocking. Liam, standing frozen in place, staring at one of the attackers. The man hesitated. Liam knew him. Daniel's gut twisted. Was this one of the men who had trained him? Hurt him? Liam's small hands trembled, but then he grabbed a rock and hurled it at the man. The soldier flinched, and Rex saw his chance. Despite his injury, Rex lunged, sinking his teeth into the man's arm, bringing him to the ground. The tide turned. With renewed energy, Daniel's team pushed forward, forcing the enemy back. One by one, the attackers retreated into the darkness. The battle was over. Liam fell to his knees, gasping. Daniel ran to him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. You did good, kid. Liam looked up at him, tears in his eyes. For the first time, he didn't look scared. Daniel turned to Rex, who lay panting beside him. The K9 had given everything to protect them. Mitchell rushed over, kneeling beside Rex. We need to get him back to base, now. Daniel nodded. Rex had fought his last battle. Now it was their turn to fight for him. With the children safe and the enemy defeated, they headed back home. But Daniel knew one thing. This mission had changed everything, and it wasn't over yet. The base was in sight, its towering gates opening as Sergeant Daniel Carter and his team rushed inside. The children were safe, but all Daniel could focus on was the unconscious form of Rex in his arms. We need a medic, now, he shouted. Captain Sarah Mitchell sprinted toward them, leading the veterinary team into action. Daniel laid Rex down carefully on the examination table, his body trembling with exhaustion. Mitchell worked fast. His leg is in bad shape, but he's stable. She glanced at Daniel. He fought harder than he should have. Daniel's throat tightened. Rex had given everything, and now it was up to them to save him. As Mitchell prepped for surgery, Daniel turned toward Liam and the rescued children. They had survived hell, but they still had a long road ahead. Colonel Holloway stepped forward, his gaze unreadable. "You did good, Carter. We'll make sure these kids are safe." Liam looked up at Daniel, his eyes filled with something new: trust. He stepped forward and for the first time wrapped his arms around Daniel in a tight hug. Daniel froze for a moment, then returned the embrace. "You're safe now, kid," he whispered. Liam pulled back and pointed at Rex, his brows furrowing with worry. Daniel knelt down, placing a hand on Liam's shoulder. "He's a fighter. He's not done yet." Hours later, Daniel sat outside the medical tent, staring at the ground, exhaustion pressing against him. He had fought countless battles, but this one felt different. Then, a soft sound, a familiar whimper. Daniel's head snapped up. Mitchell was standing at the tent's entrance, smiling. "He made it!" Daniel didn't wait. He rushed inside, and there he was. Rex, groggy but alive, his tail wagging weakly at the sight of his partner. A breath of relief escaped Daniel's lips. He dropped to his knees, rubbing the dog's head. "You scared the hell out of me, buddy." Rex gave a soft huff, as if saying, "You worry too much." Liam stepped in hesitantly, his wide eyes locked on Rex. Slowly he reached out, placing a small hand on the canine's paw. For the first time, Rex leaned into the touch. Daniel watched, his heart swelling. This dog hadn't just saved a life. He had built a bond. Days later, Rex was healing. The children were being relocated to safety. And Liam was smiling for the first time. As Daniel watched him laugh with the other kids, he felt something shift inside him. This mission had started as a rescue, but it had become something much greater. As he turned to leave, Rex limped beside him, tail wagging. Daniel chuckled, patting his head. "Come on, partner. Let's go home." And for the first time in a long time, everything felt right. If this story touched your heart, remember, courage and loyalty can overcome any challenge. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this with someone who believes in the bravery of canine heroes.